For 12 years, I hated my mother for leaving me. Then I found 600 letters under her floorboard, and I learned I had been wrong about everything. My name is Elias Brennan. Eli, to the 3 people who ever bothered to call me anything. And on the morning I turned 18, I sat across from Mr. Henderson in his fluorescent-lit office at St. Bartholomew's, watching him slide a cardboard box across his desk like he was passing me a tray at a cafeteria. "That's you, kid," he said. That was me. 12 years of being a ward of the state, reduced to 1 cardboard box, 2 changes of clothes, a paperback I'd stopped reading at 14, a manila envelope full of documents that proved I existed, legally speaking, even if no one had ever quite proven I mattered. Henderson leaned back in his chair. The chair squeaked. Everything in that building squeaked. The floors, the doors, the fluorescent lights that flickered like they were trying to die and just couldn't quite manage it. "So you're free, Elias." Free. That was a funny word for it. Because freedom, at 18, with $312 in your pocket and nowhere to sleep that night, doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like the floor disappearing, like someone opening a door you didn't ask to walk through and shoving you out into the cold. But I nodded. Because what else do you do? "There's one more thing," Henderson said. He fished a white envelope out of a wire basket. Thick paper. Expensive. The kind of envelope you don't see in a place like St. Bartholomew's, where everything is beige and gray and stamped with the seal of the state. My name was typed on the front. Elias Brennan. Below it, in elegant black letters, Forsyth and Associates, attorneys at law. "What is it?" I asked. "No idea, kid. They just said it was important. Something about an estate." An estate. I almost laughed, because I didn't have an estate. I didn't have anything. I was a kid in a cardboard box with a paperback and a state-issued birth certificate. What I had was nothing. What I'd always had was nothing. But I took the envelope. And the next morning, in a cheap motel room by the highway, with the hum of trucks rattling the thin window, I tore it open. The language inside was thick. Legal, testamentary disposition, fiduciary obligations, words I didn't understand and didn't want to. But one phrase caught me. One name. Cora Brennan. My mother. The woman who disappeared from my life when I was 6 years old. The woman I remembered only in pieces. The smell of rain on asphalt. A wool coat scratching my cheek. A song she used to hum, low and slow when she thought I was already asleep. The woman who'd left me in a sterile office with a social worker, kissed the top of my head, and said, "I'll be back soon, baby. I promise." And then never came back. For 12 years, that was the only thing I knew about her, that she didn't come back, that she didn't want me. That somewhere out there, my mother was alive and breathing and living her life, and I wasn't part of it. That's what the system told me. Abandonment. The word stamped on my file in red ink. But the letter in my hand said something different. It said estate. It said deceased. It said my mother was dead. And it said she had left something behind. For me. The bus to the law firm wheezed through downtown traffic the next morning. I sat near the back. I always sit near the back. You learn that, growing up in places like St. Bartholomew's. You learn to keep your back against the wall, your eyes on the door, your name in your pocket until someone asks for it. The building was glass and steel, the kind that scrapes the sky and makes you feel small just looking up at it. The receptionist stared at me like I'd wandered in off the street, which technically I had. "I have an appointment with Ms. Forsyth," I said. She didn't smile. She just pressed a button on her phone and told someone, somewhere, that the boy was here. The boy. That was me. A few minutes later, a woman appeared in the lobby. Silver hair pulled back into a soft knot. Black dress. No jewelry except a thin gold chain at her throat. She wasn't tall. She wasn't imposing. But there was something about her, about the way she walked, that made the receptionist sit up straighter. She stopped in front of me. She looked at my face. And for just 1 second, I thought she was going to cry. "Elias," she said softly. "I'm Adelaide Forsyth. Please, come with me." Her office had a window that took up the whole wall. The city stretched out below us. Tiny cars, tiny people, tiny lives, going on with their tiny errands, while I sat in a leather chair across from a woman who knew my mother better than I ever did. She didn't sit behind her desk. She sat in the chair next to mine. That was the first thing that struck me. The second was her hands. They were shaking. She tried to hide it. She folded them in her lap. She pressed her fingers together. But I saw it, because I've spent 12 years watching adults try to hide things from me, and I know all the tells. "Elias," she said, "thank you for coming. You said it was about my mother." "Yes." "She's dead." "Yes." A pause. A long one. "When?" I asked. She drew a slow breath. 8 months ago. 8 months. 8 months ago, my mother had been alive. 8 months ago, she was breathing, walking, eating breakfast somewhere. And nobody had told me. Nobody had picked up the phone and said, "Hey, kid, your mom's gone." I'd been at St. Bartholomew's, sitting in geometry class, watching the clock, counting down the days until I turned 18 and the state was finished with me. And my mother had been dying. I didn't cry. I don't cry in offices. I just sat very still and stared at a spot on the carpet and waited for her to keep talking. "Her name was Cora," Ms. Forsythe said. "Cora Brennan. She was 42 years old." 42. "How?" I managed. "Heart failure. The doctors said she'd been working too hard for too long. Her body just gave out." I nodded. I don't know why I nodded. Like I was agreeing with something. Like, yes, that makes sense. My mother worked herself to death and never told me. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Why not 8 months ago?" Ms. Forsythe's eyes filled. "Because your mother asked me not to." "What?" "It was in her will. She asked that you not be contacted until you turned 18. She didn't want this burden to follow you through your last months of school. She didn't want you to grieve a stranger." A stranger. That word landed wrong. It landed sharp. Because my mother wasn't a stranger. My mother was a ghost. A song hummed in the dark. A wool coat. A voice saying, "I'll be back soon, baby." But she wasn't a stranger. You can't be a stranger to your own son. Miss Forsythe was watching me. There was something in her face I couldn't quite place. Not pity, not exactly grief. Something older, something like recognition. "Did you know her well?" I asked. She looked away. She looked at the window, at the city, at the tiny cars and tinier lives. "A long time ago," she said softly. "We were young together once." Then she straightened her shoulders. She reached into her desk. She pulled out a thick file. She slid it across the polished wood toward me. "Your mother left you a house." I opened the file. Photographs. A cottage. Small. Wooden. The kind of place you see in books about places that don't exist anymore. Except this one was real. And it was rotting. The windows were boarded over. The porch sagged on one side. Paint peeled off the walls in long, curling strips, like the house was shedding skin. It was surrounded by weeds, by trees that had grown too close, by the kind of silence I could feel even through the photograph. "It's in a town called Hollow Pine," Ms. Forsythe said, "about 4 hours north of here. She inherited it from her grandmother. It's been in your family for 3 generations. My family. That word. I'd never had a family. I had a mother who left, a father I didn't remember, a grandmother I'd never met. But now there was a house. There's a problem," Ms. Forsythe continued, gentle but direct. "Your mother fell behind on the property taxes during her final years. The amount owed is just over $7,000. 7,000. I had 312. And there's an offer on the table," she said. She slid another paper across. "Ridgeline Holdings, a development company. They wanted the land. They wanted to tear the house down and build something newer, bigger. The offer was $25,000. They'd cover the back taxes. I'd walk away with about $18,000, minus her fees. $18,000. That was rent. That was groceries. That was a real winter coat. That was a community college application. That was the beginning of a life. That was everything. She held out a pen. She didn't smile. She didn't push. She just waited. And I reached for the pen. And then she did something I'll never forget. She put her hand over mine. Soft. Gentle. The kind of touch you don't get when you grow up in places like St. Bartholomew's. "Elias," she said, "before you sign, I made a promise to your mother. One promise. And I'm going to keep it." I waited. "She asked me to tell you, to your face, to go see the house before you sold it. Just once. Just one day. She said you would understand when you got there." I stared at her. "Did she leave a message?" I asked. "Anything for me?" Ms. Forsyth's eyes filled again. "She left you a key," she said, and from her desk drawer she pulled out a small brass key, tied to a piece of red yarn, faded, worn soft from being held 1,000 times. She placed it in my palm. It was warm. I don't know why it was warm. It had been sitting in a drawer. It should have been cold, but it wasn't. The bus to Hollow Pine left at 8 the next morning. I'd never been north of the city, not once in 18 years. The farthest I'd ever traveled was a school field trip to a state park when I was 13, and even that had felt like another country. The terminal smelled like diesel and stale coffee. I bought a one-way ticket. It cost $47. I watched the cashier count out my change like I was watching her count out the rest of my life. The bus was old. The seats were patched with duct tape. The window beside me was streaked with the rain of 100 other passengers. I sat down. I held the key in my fist. I didn't let go. The driver pulled out of the terminal, and the city began to shrink behind us. Glass towers gave way to brownstones. Brownstones gave way to strip malls. Strip malls gave way to long stretches of farmland, brown and frozen in late autumn. The other passengers were quiet. An old woman with a netted bag of oranges. A man in paint-spattered overalls who fell asleep against the window within 20 minutes. A young mother with a toddler who pressed his sticky hand against the glass and watched the world go by. I watched them. And then I watched my reflection. My face superimposed on the passing fields. It was a stranger's face. Pale, thin, eyes too tired for someone who hadn't even started living yet. For my whole life, I'd defined myself by what I lacked. No father, no mother, no home, no family. I was a collection of empty spaces. And now I was on a bus, going to look at another empty space. A boarded-up cottage in a town I'd never heard of, left behind by a woman who'd left me behind first. What was I even doing? The logical part of my brain screamed at me to turn around, sign the papers, take the money, start a life. But somewhere deeper, something quieter, something stubborn, kept me pinned to that vibrating seat. I kept thinking about Miss Forsyth's hands, how they shook. Why would a grown woman's hands shake over a stranger? She had known my mother. We were young together once. That had been a strange way to put it. Not we worked together. Not I represented her. We were young together once. And whatever that meant, she hadn't told me. She had just put a warm key in my palm and asked me to drive 4 hours into the woods to find out for myself. The landscape changed. Flat fields turned into rolling hills. Hills turned into forest. The sky got bigger. The air, when the bus stopped at a gas station 2 hours in, smelled like pine and damp earth and something else I couldn't name. Old. It smelled old. Like a place that had been here long before highways, before bus routes, before me. The driver called out the stop almost as an afterthought. Hollow Pine. I looked up. I looked out the window. And I almost laughed, because there was nothing there. A blinking traffic light. A gas station with 2 old-fashioned pumps. A general store with a wooden porch and a faded Coca-Cola sign that had probably been hanging there since before my mother was born. A handful of houses scattered along a narrow road. That was it. That was the town. That was where my mother had spent the last 12 years of her life. I stepped off the bus, and the cold hit me first. Then the silence. The silence was the strangest thing. In the city, there's always something. Traffic, sirens, voices, the hum of electricity that never quite stops. Here, there was nothing. Just the wind, just the crows, just the sound of my own footsteps as I walked across the gravel parking lot toward the general store. The bell above the door rang when I stepped inside. The store smelled like coffee and cedar and old paper. Shelves lined with cans of soup, bags of flour, kerosene lanterns I didn't think anyone still made. A wood stove in the corner, ticking with heat. And behind the counter, an old man. He was reading a newspaper. He had glasses pushed down on his nose. His face was the kind of face you only get from 73 years of weather and work, all creases and lines and a beard that hadn't been trimmed in a while. He looked up when the bell rang. He looked at me, and then he stopped. His newspaper lowered. He took off his glasses. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. "Lord have mercy," he said quietly. I didn't move. "You're Cora's boy." It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" I asked. "You've got her eyes." He kept staring, like he was checking to make sure I was real, like I might disappear if he blinked. Then he set down his newspaper. He walked around the counter. He reached into a basket near the register, pulled out a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, and pressed it into my hands. "You eaten today?" "I'm fine." That ain't what I asked. He pushed the sandwich at me again. I took it. "My name's Walter," he said. "Walter Briggs. I knew your mother. I knew her family too. Her grandfather built that house you're going to see." He paused. "And Ruth's waiting for you." "Who?" "Ruth Pemberton, up the road. She's been waiting 8 months." He said it like it was nothing. Like of course there was a woman waiting 8 months for a boy she'd never met. "How does she know I'm coming?" I asked. Walter almost smiled. "Son, in a town this size, everybody knows you're coming the minute you stepped off that bus." The road out of town turned to gravel within half a mile. Within a mile, it turned to dirt. The trees pressed in on both sides, pines mostly, tall and thin and dark. The branches met overhead and turned the whole road into a tunnel, dim and quiet and cold. I walked with my hands in my pockets, the sandwich in my backpack, the key on its red yarn looped around my wrist so I wouldn't lose it. And then I saw her, an old woman, sitting on a wooden chair beside the road. She had a blanket across her lap, a thermos beside her. She was looking down at her hands, the way old women do when they're waiting for something they're not sure will come. She heard me before she saw me. She looked up. She had soft gray hair under a knit cap, eyes the color of weak tea, a face that had cried often and laughed often, and never stopped doing either. She stood up slowly. She took one step toward me, and then she said something I will never forget for as long as I live. "I've been waiting for you, son. For 8 months. I've been waiting." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. So I just stood there in the middle of a dirt road in the middle of nowhere, holding a sandwich and a brass key, while a woman I'd never met looked at me like she'd been holding her breath for the better part of a year. "You knew my mother," I said. "I loved your mother." The words landed in my chest like a stone dropped in deep water. I loved your mother. 3 words. I had never in my entire life heard anyone say them. "Are you Ruth?" "I am." "Walter said you were waiting." "He's right." She picked up her thermos. She tucked the blanket over her arm. She looked toward the bend in the road ahead. "The house is just there, around that curve. Are you coming with me?" She shook her head. "No, son. Not the first time. The first time, you go alone." That's the way she would have wanted it. She reached out. She touched my face. Just her fingertips. Just for a second. The way a grandmother touches a grandchild she hasn't seen in too long. "I'll be right here when you come out," she said. "Take as long as you need." I walked. The road curved. And there it was. The cottage and the photographs. But the photographs hadn't done it justice. The photographs couldn't capture the loneliness. The way the house seemed to lean, just slightly, like it had been holding itself up for too long and was tired. The way the boards over the windows looked like blindfolds on a face. The way the porch sagged on one side, like a knee that had finally given out. The roof was streaked dark with old rain. The paint, what was left of it, had once been pale yellow. You could still see traces of it, like the ghost of something that used to be a home. I walked up to the front steps. I tried the key in the front door. The key slid in. The key turned, but the door wouldn't open. I pushed. I shoved my shoulder against it. The wood had swollen with 12 years of humidity, and the frame had warped around it, and the whole thing was sealed shut like a vault. A house that didn't want to be entered. I circled around to the side. I pushed through dead bushes and dry weeds. I found a small window, low to the ground, where the boarding looked older than the others. The nails were rusted. The wood was rotten. I wedged my fingers into the gap. I pulled. The board gave way with a long, slow shriek of rust and protest. Dust poured out of the opening like smoke. The smell hit me next. Old air, trapped air, the smell of things that had been waiting too long. I hoisted myself up. I pulled myself through. I dropped onto the floor inside, and I stood there in the dark. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The second thing I noticed was the light. A single shaft of pale gray slanting in through the window I'd just uncovered, catching the dust as it spun and turned in the air, like a galaxy of tiny stars. I was in a kitchen, a small one, a formica table, 2 chairs, a rust-stained sink, an old gas stove, a calendar on the wall, faded so badly I couldn't tell what year it was from. Everything was covered in dust. But not evenly. I noticed it when I walked past the table. The dust on the kitchen table was thinner than the dust on the floor. The dust on the counter near the stove was thinner than the dust on the windowsill. Like someone had been here. Not recently, but not as long ago as the rest of the house. Like my mother had still been living here. Until 8 months ago. Until her heart gave out. I moved through the rooms slowly. Each one a portrait of a life I'd never seen. A living room with a single armchair, the stuffing leaking from a tear in the cushion. A bathroom with a clawfoot tub stained with rust. A hallway lined with empty picture hooks where photographs must have hung once and didn't anymore. And then a bedroom, the smallest room in the house. The door was open. I stepped inside. An iron bed frame, stripped of its mattress, a small wooden dresser, a window with no curtain, light coming in pale and gray, a rag rug on the floor. The air was different in here, heavier. This was where she slept. This was where she had spent 12 years waiting. This was the heart of the silence. I sat down on the edge of the bed. I ran my hand along the dusty dresser top. And then, for the first time since I was 10 years old, I cried. I cried like a child. I cried for the 6-year-old boy in a sterile office, told to wait for a mother who never came. I cried for the kid who'd built walls of anger to protect himself from caring about a woman he'd been told didn't care about him. I cried for every birthday I'd spent alone and every Christmas I'd watched other kids get picked up and every single day of 12 years that I'd believed I was unwanted. And I cried for her, for Cora, for the woman who had lived and died in this room, alone. I don't know how long I sat there, long enough for the light to shift. I stood up. I wiped my face with my sleeve. I started to walk out. And that's when my foot caught. Right next to the bed, a floorboard, just slightly raised, maybe 1/4 of an inch, maybe less, but enough to feel under my shoe. I knelt down. My knees cracked in the silence. I ran my fingers along the edge of the board. There was a gap, not a crack, a gap, The board had been cut, deliberately, then set back into place. I dug my fingernails under the edge. I lifted. The board came up easily. No nails, no glue, just fitted, perfectly, into a space someone had made. And underneath, in the dark hollow between the joists, a metal box, olive green, an old ammunition case, the kind soldiers used to carry. Heavy latches, worn edges, the lid scratched with 1,000 tiny lines from being opened and closed, and opened and closed. I lifted it out. It was cold. It was heavy. I sat on the floor of my mother's bedroom and set the box on my lap. I tried the latch. It was stiff. I pressed harder. It groaned. It clicked. The lid lifted. Inside, letters, stacks and stacks and stacks of them, yellowed envelopes, faded twine, each bundle tied carefully, each labeled with a year, in handwriting I didn't recognize but somehow did, in the way you recognize a song you've never heard before but knew was yours. There must have been hundreds of them. Hundreds. On top of the first bundle. A single envelope. Untied. White. Newer than the others. 2 words on the front. For Elias. My hands stopped working. I sat there. I stared at it. I couldn't make my fingers move. Because some part of me knew. Some part of me knew that the moment I opened that letter, the story of my life was going to change. I took a breath. I picked up the envelope. I opened it. A single sheet of paper, folded once, covered in her handwriting. My darling Elias, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and it means you finally came home. I know what you must have believed all these years. I know what they told you. I know you must have hated me, and oh, my sweet boy, I don't blame you. Not for a single day, not for a single hour. But I need you to know, I never left you, Elias. I hid you. I hid you because the man your father owed money to, a man named Victor Halloran, came to our apartment in the weeks after your father's funeral. He stood in our kitchen, in front of the refrigerator where I had stuck a drawing you made of the 3 of us, and he told me he knew which school you went to. He told me what time you walked home. He told me the color of your backpack. Elias, I had to make a choice. The hardest choice a mother can make. I had to make you disappear. Adelaide helped me. She was the only person in the world I trusted. She did the legal work. She made it look like abandonment on paper because the truth would have taken months we did not have. She moved you through the system. She buried your file. She prayed with me on the phone the night before I left you, while I sobbed in a motel bathroom. I came here, to your great-grandmother's house, the house your grandfather built with his own hands. I boarded up the windows. I lived like a ghost. I worked nights at the hospital in the next town over. I saved every penny. And every Sunday evening, for 12 years, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote you a letter I could never send. This box is my life, Elias. This box is everything I couldn't give you in person. Please, read them. Read all of them. Read them in any order. Read them slowly. Take your time. I want you to know me. I want you to know that you were loved. Every day. Every single day. And this house, my darling boy, this house isn't a ruin. It's a fortress. I built it for you. Whether you knew it or not, whether you ever came or not, it was always for you. Don't let them take it. Don't let them take the one thing I had left to give. All my love. Forever and ever and always. Mom, I let the letter fall. A sound came out of me that I didn't recognize. Not a sob, not a cry. Something rawer than that. Something older. The sound a person makes when 12 years of grief comes up all at once and there's no shape for it yet. I sat on the floor of that dusty bedroom. I held the empty envelope in my hands, and I sobbed like the 6-year-old boy I'd never been allowed to be. She hadn't left me. She had saved me. The mother I'd hated for 12 years had spent 12 years in this room, writing letters she couldn't send, loving a son she couldn't touch, carrying a weight no one knew she carried, while I sat in St. Bartholomew's, building walls, convinced I was unwanted, convinced I was unlovable, while she was here, in this room, writing my name, over and over and over. For 12 years, the light through the window had turned gold, then orange, then dim. My phone, somewhere in my pocket, buzzed once. I didn't move. It buzzed again. I pulled it out. A text from Ms. Forsyth, just checking in. Ridgeline is getting impatient. Have you had time to think? I stared at the screen. $18,000. A clean break. A new life. The chance to walk away from the ghost of a woman who had ruined my life by refusing to die quietly. Except she hadn't ruined my life. She had given me a life. She had given up her own so that I could have one. And $18,000 suddenly felt like the dirtiest amount of money I had ever seen. Because they wanted to bulldoze this place. They wanted to flatten the fortress she'd built, the bedroom she'd died in, the kitchen where she'd worn the dust thin with her last few months of cooking. They wanted to erase her, just like she'd erased herself, to save me. I closed my phone. I picked up the letter from the floor. I held it against my chest, and I whispered into the silence of that bedroom the first thing I had said to my mother in 12 years. I'm here, Mom. I'm here. I came home. Outside, the sun was setting. Outside, somewhere up the road, Ruth Pemberton was still sitting in her wooden chair, waiting. And inside, on the floor of a boarded-up cottage in a town that didn't exist on most maps, a boy who had spent his whole life believing he was unwanted finally understood. He had been wanted. Every day, every single day, for 12 years, by a woman who had loved him so much. She had let him hate her, to keep him alive. I came out of the house at dusk. Ruth was still there. Same wooden chair, same blanket, same thermos, as if 8 months of waiting had taught her how to wait one more hour. She saw my face. She didn't ask. She just stood up, slowly, like her knees hurt, like she'd been sitting too long, and she opened her arms. I walked into them. I'm 18 years old, I'm 6 feet tall, and I walked into the arms of a 70-year-old woman I'd known for less than a day, and I let her hold me up, because my legs wouldn't, because I had just learned that my mother had loved me, and I didn't know what to do with a fact that big. There now, Ruth whispered into my hair. There. I know. She kept saying it. I know. Like she'd been knowing for me, all those years, while I sat in St. Bartholomew's, believing I was nothing. She had known I was something. She had known the whole time. She didn't take me back to my mother's house. She took me to hers, a small place. White clapboard, yellow shutters. 20 minutes walk back toward town. Set off the road just enough that you'd miss it if you weren't looking. There was a kettle already on the stove. There was a quilt folded at the end of the couch. There was a place set for me at the table, a plate, a glass, a bowl turned upside down to keep the dust off. She had been ready. For 8 months, she had been ready. You eat, she said. Then you sleep. Tomorrow we talk. Ruth, eat first. Ruth, did she? Did she suffer? The kettle whistled. Ruth turned away. She picked it up. She poured. Her hands were steady, but her shoulders weren't. She slipped away in the garden, Ruth said softly. Walter found her. She was sitting in the dirt next to the rose bush, the one she'd planted the year you were born. He said she looked peaceful, like she was waiting for something. Waiting for what? Ruth set the cup in front of me. Waiting for you, son. I slept on her couch that night. I dreamed about my mother. Not the ghost mother. Not the woman in fragments. A real one. A woman with a face and a voice and a body that took up space in the world. She was standing in a kitchen. She was stirring a pot of soup. She turned, and she saw me, and she smiled. I woke up at 4 in the morning. The room was dark. The fire in the stove had burned down to coals, and I was crying. Quietly. The way you cry when you didn't get to say goodbye. In the morning, Ruth made me coffee. She put a piece of toast in front of me. Butter and honey. The way mothers everywhere have been putting toast in front of children since the beginning of time. You ready? She said. For what? For her. She nodded toward the door. You're going to spend the day at your mother's house. You're going to open the windows. You're going to let the light in. You're going to read. Ruth, I can't. You can. It's 600 letters. Then you better get started. She refilled my coffee. She didn't smile. She just looked at me, the way a grandmother looks at a grandson who's about to do something hard. She wrote you every Sunday, Ruth said, for 12 years. You owe her the reading. I owed her. I owed her. Until that moment, no one had ever told me I owed my mother anything. I walked back to the cottage at sunrise. The road was different in the morning light, less menacing, less alive in that watchful way it had felt the day before. The pines didn't loom. They just stood there, tall, patient, like they'd been waiting too. I pried 2 more boards off the kitchen windows, then the living room, then the front porch. Light came pouring in. 12 years of light, all at once. Dust rose up to meet it. Galaxies spinning in every shaft of sun. The whole house seemed to inhale. I sat down on the floor of the bedroom. I lifted the lid of the box, and I started to read. The first letter was dated 12 years ago, October 4th. My darling boy, today I left you. That's how the world will tell it. That's how they will tell it to you. They will say that I left. But Elias, I did not leave. I drove away with my hands shaking on the wheel. I drove to a motel, and I sat on the bathroom floor for 3 hours. I screamed into a towel so the neighbors wouldn't hear. And then I drove here, to your great-grandmother's house, where I am writing this, by candlelight, because the power hasn't been turned on yet, because I don't want anyone to know I'm here. I want you to know something, Elias, right now, while you're 6 years old, while you don't even know you've been left, wherever you are tonight, whoever is putting you to bed, whatever stranger is reading you a story. I am here. I am awake. I am thinking of you, and I will think of you every night for the rest of my life. I promise. Mom. I sat with that one for a long time. A candle, a bathroom floor, a woman screaming into a towel, while they were tucking me into a metal bed at St. Bartholomew's, telling me my mother would be back soon. She had been writing this, by candlelight. I picked up the next letter, and the next. I read until noon. I read until my back ached and my eyes burned and my throat was sandpaper. I read about her first year here, about the fear, the constant looking over her shoulder, the nights she slept with a kitchen knife under the pillow, the job she finally found at a hospital 30 miles north as a night nurse on the pediatric floor. The babies cry, Elias, she wrote in one letter, and I rock them, and I sing to them, and I pretend they are you. I read about Ruth, about how Ruth had found her that first winter, half-starved, hiding in the cottage, no heat, no power, eating canned beans by candlelight. Ruth had knocked on the door, my mother wrote, just knocked, like she'd been doing it her whole life. And when my mother finally opened the door, Ruth had said, Cora, honey, your grandmother was my best friend. I knew you when you were born, and I know you didn't come back here for a vacation, so you're going to let me in, and I'm going to make you a meal, and we are going to figure this out. I read that letter twice, then 3 times, and then I stood up and walked to the window and looked out at the dirt road that led back to Ruth's house. She had saved my mother first, so my mother could save me. A chain of women, holding each other. I was reading in the kitchen when Ruth came back. She didn't knock either. She walked in with a basket. Bread, a jar of stew, a thermos of coffee, a plate of cookies wrapped in a cloth napkin. She set it all on the table without a word. She watched me read for a moment. Then she said, "You hungry?" "No." "Eat anyway." So I ate, and she sat across from me, her hands folded around her own coffee cup, and she watched me eat the way mothers watch their children eat, like the act itself was something holy. Ruth? Why didn't she ever try to find me? Even just to look? Ruth set her cup down. She did, Elias. What? She did look. How? Ruth got up, slowly. She walked to a small cabinet near the door. She pulled out an envelope, thick with paper, and brought it back to the table. She slid it across. "Open it." I did. Inside, photocopies of report cards. Mine. Elias Brennan, grade 3, reading, B+, math, A-, behavior, quiet, needs encouragement to participate. Elias Brennan, grade 5, reading, A, math, A, behavior, withdrawn but improving. Elias Brennan, grade 8, honor roll. Elias Brennan, grade 11, photography elective. Showed strong eye for composition. Every year, every grade. Through to the spring before my 18th birthday. I stared at the papers. I couldn't speak. "How?" I finally managed. "How did she get these?" "Adelaide arranged it." "What?" "Adelaide Forsyth, your mother's lawyer. She knew a social worker. A good woman, recently retired. The two of them worked it out, quiet-like. Every 6 months, the social worker would slip Adelaide a summary. Adelaide would mail it here. Your mother would sit at that table and read every word." Ruth reached into the envelope. She pulled out one more thing. An official school photograph. Me at 14. Sullen, hair too long, eyes flat. The kind of photograph nobody puts on a fridge. Except on the back. In my mother's handwriting. My beautiful boy. Look how tall he's getting. He has his father's mouth. I wonder what he's reading these days. I held that photograph for a long time. I have never been called beautiful in my life. Not once. Not by anyone. Until I read those 4 words on the back of a school photograph my mother had carried in an envelope. For 4 years, Ruth let me cry. She didn't make a fuss. She just sat across from me. She put her hand over mine on the table. She held it there. And when I was done, she stood up. "Come on." "Where?" "There's more to show you." She led me back into the bedroom. She knelt down. Slow. Careful. She opened the bottom drawer of the dresser. Inside, folded clothes. A boy's flannel shirt, size youth medium. A pair of jeans, also youth. A heavier coat, teen size. A pair of work boots, men's size 11, each one wrapped in tissue paper, each one tagged, each one labeled with a year. Eli, age 8. Eli, age 10. Eli, age 12. Eli, age 15. Eli, age 18. I stared at the boots. Size 11. She had guessed. She had guessed what size her son would wear at 18, and she had been right. "Try them," Ruth said softly. I sat down on the bed. I pulled off my old sneakers. I slipped my foot into the right boot. It fit. It fit like it had been waiting for me. Because it had. There were more things. So many more. In the kitchen cupboard, a set of plates. 8 of them. Still in the box. For when Eli comes home. In the linen closet, a folded quilt. Blue. Hand-stitched. With a small label sewn into the corner. Made for my son. In the living room. A small bookshelf I hadn't noticed before. Empty. Ruth ran her hand along the empty shelf. She was going to fill it, Ruth said. When you came, she wanted you to pick the books. Empty. She'd left it empty. For me to fill. That afternoon, Walter showed up with a hammer. He didn't say much. He just looked at the porch. He said, "That step's going to break a leg sooner or later." And he started fixing it. I came out to help. He waved me off. "You read your letters, son. I'll do this." So I read, while Walter hammered, while Ruth sat on a chair on the porch and watched the road like she'd always done, while a wind moved through the pines. I read about my mother's second year here, about the loneliness, about how she would walk to the edge of town some nights, just to see the lights of the houses, and pretend one of them was hers, and one of the children inside was me. I read about her third year, the year she stopped flinching when a car drove past. I read about her fourth year, the year she started the rose bush, the one Walter found her under. I read about her fifth year, and that's when the letters changed. That's when she stopped just writing and started planning. Elias, I've started looking into Halloran's businesses. I know that sounds insane. A scared single mother in the woods, trying to take down a man like that. But Elias, he took everything from us. He hounded your father into the grave, even if he didn't pull the trigger. He took our home. He took you from me. He stole 12 years of your face. I am not going to die afraid of him. I am going to die having fought him, even if he never knows. Even if you never know, I will know. I sat on the porch with that letter in my lap. Walter had finished the step. He was sitting beside me now. Ruth had come out with 3 cups of coffee. I looked up. Walter. Did you know? Know what? That she was investigating him. Walter took a long sip. He looked out at the road. I knew. How? Because I helped her. I set the cup down too hard. Coffee splashed. Ruth steadied it. You helped her, I repeated. I did. Why? Walter was quiet a long time. Son, he said finally, almost 50 years ago, I worked for Victor Halloran. The world tilted. I was 23 years old. I was his bookkeeper. I needed the job. I told myself it was just numbers, just paperwork, just columns of figures that didn't mean anything. He shook his head slowly. I was wrong. What did you do? I kept his books for 3 years. I watched him do things to people. I watched a family lose their farm because they were 2 payments behind. I watched a man hang himself in his garage after Victor took his business. I watched. And I did nothing. I just kept the numbers neat. His voice got smaller. Then one winter, Halloran ruined a woman I had grown up with, took her dry cleaning shop, drove her into a nervous breakdown, and the day they took her away to the hospital, I went home and I sat in my kitchen and I drank a bottle of whiskey and I decided I was going to leave. Did he let you? He let me, because I was nothing to him. I was a number. He had 10 more like me waiting in line. And then, almost 50 years passed. I moved to Hollow Pine. I bought the store. I lived quietly. I tried to forget. And then, one day, a woman walked into my store. She had a baby on her hip. She said her name was Cora Brennan, and she'd just inherited her grandmother's house, and could I help her find a generator? He looked at me. I knew that name. I had seen it in Halloran's books, almost 50 years before. Ruth set her cup down. Tell him the rest, Walter. Walter cleared his throat. Your great-grandfather, Cora's grandfather, owed Victor Halloran money once a long time ago. He didn't pay, and Halloran came for the house. Halloran came to take this property. What happened? Your great-grandfather paid him, in cash, every penny. He saved his family's home, and Halloran. Halloran never forgot. He never forgets a property he wanted and didn't get. So when your father borrowed money from him decades later, and when the debt fell to your mother, and when she ran, he must have done what he always does. He must have looked at her name and remembered the house he never got. He wasn't just chasing the debt. No, son, he was finishing a grudge that started before any of us were born. I had to stand up. I had to walk. I walked off the porch. I walked into the yard. I walked to the edge of the trees, and I stood there, breathing. Almost 50 years. Halloran had been circling this house for almost 50 years. My mother hadn't run from a loan shark. She had run from a man who had been hunting her family for 3 generations. And he had won. He had won. 12 years he had kept her in this cottage. 12 years he had kept me in a state home. He had broken our family open like an egg. And now, Ridgeline Holdings, his company, was trying to buy the house out from under me for $25,000, like he was going to finish what he started, like he was going to take the last thing from us. I felt something in my chest I had never felt before. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't fear. It was a low, hot, steady fury, the kind that lives at the bottom of a person, the kind your mother passes down to you, like an eye color, like a chin, like a stubbornness you didn't know you had. I went back up onto the porch. I sat down next to Walter. "What else did she do?" I said. "Tell me everything." She had built a case, a real one. Walter had helped her gather it, cross-referencing old records he remembered, bank routing numbers he'd never forgotten, names of shell companies he'd written into Halloran's ledgers 4 decades ago. Ridgeline Holdings was just one branch. There were 6. She had documented all of them, property by property, family by family. She had a list, a long list, of people Halloran had ruined, some still alive, some not. She had kept the list in a notebook. And the notebook she had hidden. "Did she tell you where?" I asked. Walter shook his head. "She wouldn't. She said it was safer if no one knew but her. She said if anything ever happened to her, her son, if he ever came home, her son would find it." I looked at him. "How?" "She left clues, Elias, in the letters. That's what she told me. Read the letters. The answer is in the letters." So I read. For the next 3 days. I barely slept. I barely ate. I read by sunlight. I read by lamplight. I read until my eyes blurred and the words swam and Ruth made me lie down on the couch for 2 hours just to save my sight. I read about the year she planted a vegetable garden and the deer ate all of it in one night. I read about the year a hurricane took the roof off the shed. I read about the year she got a kitten. "I named her Olive," the letter said. "She is the color of the trim on this house when it was new. She follows me into the garden. She sleeps on my feet. I tell her about you. She listens. She is the only living thing I have told, except, of course, for Ruth and Walter and Adelaide, but they are humans. They listen with judgment." Olive just blinks. I cried at that one, for a long time. I read about the year my mother got sick for the first time. Just the flu. But she lay in this house for a week with nobody but Ruth checking in on her, and she wrote me a letter that said, "If I had died this week, you would never have known I tried. And that has been the worst thought of my life. So I am going to live, my boy. I am going to live. And I am going to leave you something. I am going to leave you proof." I read about year 7. Year 7 was the year of the fireplace. "Elias, your great-grandfather built this house himself, with his own hands, and he was a clever man. He built secrets into it. There is a stone in the hearth, the 3rd one from the left, behind the old wood stove. It is loose. I am putting things there. The notebook, the tapes, some money, a seed of a beginning. If you are reading this, Elias, then you have made it home. And if you have made it home, you have the right to know. Look behind the stove, my love. Look in the hearth." I read that letter 3 times. Then I stood up, slowly. My legs shook. I walked into the living room. The wood stove was still there, pot-bellied, black with old soot, sitting in front of the stone fireplace like it had been waiting for me to get up and look. I dragged it forward. The legs scraped on the floor. The pipe groaned. The hearthstones underneath, 5 of them, wide, heavy, set close together. I knelt down. I counted. 3rd from the left. I ran my fingers along the edges. One side moved. Just slightly. Just enough. I pried. I pulled. The stone lifted out, heavier than I expected, and underneath was a dark, hollow space. And inside, a small wooden box. I lifted it out. I sat back on my heels. I held it in my lap. And I opened it. A small black notebook. A stack of cassette tapes. 6 of them. Each labeled with a date. Each in my mother's handwriting. A brown envelope. Thick. Heavy. Sealed with red wax. and on top, a folded piece of paper. I opened it. Be brave, my Eli. Your life is my legacy. The money in the envelope is for the taxes. The notebook is for the truth. The tapes are for your courage. Use them when you are ready. Do not be afraid. You are not alone. You have never been alone. You have a town, a community, a people. They are mine. They are yours. We are all yours. Welcome home, my boy. Mom. I opened the envelope. Cash, stacks of it, 20s, 50s, bound with rubber bands. I didn't count it. I knew. Some part of me knew before I could finish the thought that it was enough, that it was just enough to pay the taxes, to buy time. She had saved it, a nurse's salary, for 12 years, in a small town, in a house with no heat for 3 of those winters. She had saved every penny. For me. I held the envelope to my chest. I bent forward until my forehead touched the floor, and I whispered into the dust between the boards, "Thank you, Mom. Thank you. Thank you." That night, I came back to Ruth's house with the box. She didn't say anything when she saw it. She just put another cup of coffee in front of me, and she sat down across from me, and she waited. I opened the notebook. I started to read aloud. Names, dates, properties, amounts. A man named Daniel Harrow. Lost his auto shop in 1987. Halloran's Shell Company bought it for pennies. Resold it 8 months later for 10 times the price. A woman named Beth Marlin. Lost her bakery in 1993. Same pattern. A family named Thessaly. Lost a farm in 2001. On and on. My voice got hoarse. Ruth's eyes filled. "I knew some of these people," she said. "You did." Beth Marlin was my friend. She moved away after the bakery. Last I heard, she was in Idaho. She never recovered. Why didn't anyone stop him? Because Elias, he owns people. He owns judges. He owns the chief of police 2 counties over. He owns a state senator. There is no one to stop him. Because the people who are supposed to are him. I closed the notebook. I looked at the cassette tapes. I looked at Walter, who had come in quietly behind me. "Do you have a player?" I asked. Walter nodded. "In the back of the store." "Can we go now?" "Now." We went. The general store was dark when we walked in. Walter flicked on a single light over the counter. He went to the back. He came out with a small black tape recorder, the kind I had only ever seen in old movies. He set it on the counter. He looked at me. "You sure about this, son?" "I'm sure." He slid in the first tape. He pressed play, static. Then a voice, a man's voice, smooth, cold, the kind of voice that has never had to raise itself because it never had to. "Mrs. Brennan, I'll only say this one more time. Sign the papers, take the offer, walk away." And then, her, my mother, for the first time in 12 years. Her voice. "Mr. Halloran, I have nothing left to walk away from. You already took everything." I sat down on the floor of the store. I sat down because my legs gave out. Because that was her. That was her voice. The voice that had hummed me to sleep when I was 6. The voice that had said, "I'll be back soon, baby." The voice that had been writing my name for 12 years. It wasn't a ghost anymore. It was a person. A clear, steady, unafraid person. "You took my husband. You took my son. You took 12 years of my life. You will not take this house. And Mr. Halloran, I have copies of everything. They are with 3 different lawyers. If anything happens to me, if anything happens to my son, the truth comes out. All of it. Almost 50 years of it." Silence. Then his voice. Different now, smaller. "Mrs. Brennan, you are making a mistake." "No, Mr. Halloran, you did. Almost 50 years ago, and again 12 years ago. And you are about to do it one more time if you don't walk out of this room. So go." A pause, then footsteps, then a door, then her voice, very quiet, very close to the microphone. For you, Eli. For you, my boy. The tape clicked off. Walter stood very still. Ruth covered her mouth. I sat on the floor of that general store, and I felt something rise up in me that I had never felt before in my life. Not anger, not fear, something else, inheritance. I was her son, and she had not been afraid. So I would not be afraid either. We walked back to the cottage together, Ruth and Walter on either side of me, like two old guardians escorting a young king. The night was cold, the stars were out, the pines stood tall and patient. When we got to the porch, my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. I answered. Mr. Brennan. A cold voice, smooth, too smooth. Yes. My name is Calder. I represent Ridgeline Holdings. I understand you've been considering our offer. I'm not selling. A pause. I'd encourage you to reconsider. I'm not selling. Mr. Brennan, that property has a history. It is more trouble than it's worth. You're a young man. You have a life ahead of you. Don't waste it on a pile of rotten wood. I looked at Ruth. I looked at Walter. I looked at the cottage, lit up against the trees, light in the windows for the first time in 12 years. Mr. Calder. Yes. Tell Mr. Halloran I said hello. Silence. A long one. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Tell him I said hello, and tell him I read the letters, and tell him I have the tapes, and tell him I am my mother's son. I hung up. My hands were not shaking. For the first time in 18 years, my hands were not shaking. I looked at Ruth. She looked at me. She had tears in her eyes. There you are, she whispered. There you are, son. There you are. The next morning I walked into town. Walter walked beside me. We went to the post office, which was also the general store, which was also half the town. I wired $7,000 to the county tax office. The woman behind the counter, a tiny silver-haired postmaster named Norma, took the money. She counted it. She gave me a receipt. She looked at me over her glasses. You're Cora's boy. Yes, ma'am. She came in every other Tuesday for 12 years, bought stamps. She told me, she said, if a young man ever comes in and wires money to the tax office in her name, to give him this. Norma reached under the counter. She pulled out a small paper bag of penny candy. She slid it across. For your pocket. From your mother. She paid for it 11 years ago. Said her boy liked the yellow ones. I looked at the candy. A small plastic bag. Yellow and red wrappers inside. 11 years old. I took it. I couldn't speak. Walter put his hand on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. That night, I lit a fire in the wood stove. I lit it with the old matches from the kitchen drawer. The chimney was clear. The flue still worked. The fire caught fast, and the cottage filled with the warm, smoky smell of pine. I stood in the middle of the living room. I looked around. I looked at the empty bookshelf. I looked at the porch through the window. I looked at the kitchen with the calendar from 12 years ago still on the wall. And I said it out loud. Just once. Just to myself. Just to her. I'm staying, Mom. I'm staying. I'm home. The fire popped. The wind moved through the pines. And somewhere, in the silence of an empty bookshelf and a folded quilt and a pair of boots that fit, I felt her smile. The morning after I paid the taxes, I woke up in my mother's bed. I had not planned to. I had fallen asleep on the floor, reading her letters, and at some point in the night, I had crawled up onto the bare iron frame and pulled my coat over me like a blanket. I woke up to gray light, to the smell of wood smoke from the stove I had banked low the night before, to the sound of a bird outside the window I had uncovered 3 days ago. I sat up. I looked around. The bedroom was different now. The board was off the window. The dust was mostly swept. The empty picture hooks on the wall still waited for pictures, but the wall itself was clean. Mine. For the first time in my life, a room that was mine. I stood up. I walked to the window. I pressed my palm against the cold glass. Outside, the pines stood tall, and I was still here. I was still here. Adelaide Forsyth drove up to Hollow Pine 3 days later. I saw her car coming from a long way off. A silver sedan, slow and careful on the dirt road, dust trailing behind it like a small comet. She parked at the edge of the yard. She got out slowly. She stood there for a long time. She didn't look at me first. She looked at the cottage, at the windows, the bare windows, letting the light in, at the porch, the new step Walter had nailed in place, at the chimney, the thin line of smoke. She put a gloved hand to her mouth, and she cried, quietly, the way old women cry when they have been holding something in for a long time. I came down off the porch. I didn't say anything. I just opened my arms. She walked into them. 65 years old, a lawyer in a wool coat, crying into the shoulder of a boy she had only met twice in person. She would be so proud of you, Elias. I held her. I held her the way I had let Ruth hold me. I held her because she had been holding pieces of my mother for 12 years, and she had finally found someone to hand them to. That night, the four of us sat around my mother's kitchen table. Ruth, Walter, Adelaide, me. The wood stove crackled. The new bulb in the hanging lamp threw warm yellow light over the formica. Ruth had made stew. Adelaide ate carefully, the way a city person eats country food. Elias, she said, I have to tell you something. I set my spoon down. Your mother and I, we were not just friends. The room got very quiet. What? We grew up together, in a state home, a place upstate that closed 20 years ago. We were both there from the time we were 9. I stared at her. My mother grew up in a state home. Yes. She never told me. She never told anyone, Elias. Not Ruth. Not Walter. She carried it alone. She was ashamed. She thought it made her a bad mother. She thought it made her unworthy. So she kept it secret, until the day she found out she was pregnant. And then she called me, and she said, Adelaide, my child will know what family feels like. I swear to you, he will know. Adelaide's voice broke. She tried so hard, Elias. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. Ruth put her hand over mine. Walter looked at his plate, and Adelaide kept going, because once she had started, she could not stop. When Halloran came after her, after your father died, she called me again, middle of the night, from a payphone, and she said, Adelaide, I'm about to do the worst thing a mother can do, and I am about to do it because I love him too much to let him die. And then she asked me to help her, to handle the paperwork, to get you into the system as fast as possible, to make it look right on paper so no one would ask questions. I closed my eyes. My mother had been a foster kid. Like me, she had aged out alone, walked into the world with a cardboard box, just like me. And she had built a life. She had fallen in love. She had had a son, and the world had ripped it from her. And she had spent her last 12 years trying to give it back. Adelaide stayed 2 nights. She slept on the couch. On the second morning, she handed me a small wooden box. From her. She left it with me, to give to you when you were ready. I opened it on the porch, after we had had coffee, with the cold morning sun coming through the pines. Inside, a wedding ring, thin gold, worn smooth, a note in my mother's handwriting. This was your grandmother's, your father's mother. She was kind to me when I had no one. She gave me this on my wedding day and told me to pass it on someday. Keep it, for someone you love, someday. And a photograph, black and white, small, faded, a young woman, maybe 25, standing on the porch of this cottage, holding a baby on her hip. Behind her, the paint pale yellow, the porch straight, the world young. I turned the photograph over. Cora and Elias, 3 months old, Hollow Pine, July. I looked up. I was here. You were here. She brought me here. Yes. When I was a baby. Yes. This is the first place I ever was. Adelaide nodded, tears in her eyes. This was always your home, Elias. You just didn't remember. October became November. The leaves came down in red drifts. The mornings frosted the grass white. The wind got teeth. I learned how to live in a cottage. Walter taught me how to split wood, how to stack it, how to lay a fire that would burn through the night. Ruth taught me how to cook, properly. Soup, bread, a roast chicken with rosemary from the bush by the door. She wrote her recipes on index cards in her looping handwriting and pinned them above the stove. Eleanor from down the road brought me jars of jam, strawberry, peach, plum. Tom the plumber came one afternoon and replaced the rusted pipes under the kitchen sink and would not take my money. Your mama sat with my Linda when Linda was real sick, he said. On the night shift, held her hand. So this is on the house. I cried after he left. I cried a lot those weeks. It wasn't sad crying anymore. It was the crying you do when something inside you, something that's been clenched up tight for years, finally lets go. One Tuesday afternoon, a car pulled up the drive. Long, black, polished, out of place. I was on the porch sanding a board. I stopped. The driver got out first. Big man, sunglasses. He opened the back door, and out stepped a man I had never seen but knew instantly. Old, thin, a long camel coat, a silver-tipped cane, hair so white it looked like ice. Victor Halloran. I did not move. I did not reach for anything. I just set down the sandpaper. I stood up. I walked to the top of the porch steps. We looked at each other. A long time. Then he spoke. You have her eyes. That's what people keep telling me. You have her chin, too. And her stubbornness. I can see it in how you're standing. What do you want? He coughed. A long, deep, broken cough. May I sit? He said. Standing has become difficult. I looked at him. I looked at the chair Ruth had left on the porch. I gestured to it. He climbed the steps slowly. He sat down. He folded his hands over the head of his cane. I sat across from him. The driver waited by the car. The wind moved through the pines. Your mother came to see me 5 years ago, Halloran said. I know. You've heard the tape. I've heard the tape. Then you know she beat me. I know she stopped you. He nodded slowly. She did more than that. He looked out at the trees. His eyes were watery. Maybe age, maybe wind, maybe something else. I have been a bad man for 50 years, Elias. 50 years. I told myself I was a businessman. I told myself it was just numbers, just leverage, just the way the world worked. He coughed. Your mother walked into my office 5 years ago, alone, no bodyguard, no lawyer. She set a folder on my desk. She said, Mr. Halloran, I am not here to forgive you. I am here to tell you I am no longer afraid of you. Copies of this folder are with 3 attorneys. If I die under suspicious circumstances, they go to the FBI. If my son is ever harmed, they go to the FBI. If anyone associated with you so much as breathes near him, they go to the FBI. Are we clear? He smiled. A small, tired smile. I have not been spoken to like that in 50 years. What did you do? I sat there, after she left, for 2 hours. I looked at the folder. It was comprehensive. I poured myself a drink. I did not drink it. I sat there until the sun went down. And I asked myself a question I had not asked in 50 years. What question? What kind of man am I? A long silence. I did not like the answer. He coughed again. He pulled out a handkerchief. There was blood on it. He folded it neatly. He tucked it away. I have been undoing what I can, he said, quietly, these past 5 years. I cannot give back the dead. I cannot give back the years. But I have been returning what I can. Property, money, apologies, when people will accept them. Most do not. My mother did. Your mother did not need an apology. She did not need anything from me. That was the strength of her. She needed nothing I could give. He looked at me. His eyes were sharp. But she did leave instructions. What instructions? She told me, if my son ever comes home, if he ever chooses to stay, pay him back what his father owed, with honest interest, calculated as if it had been a real loan from a real bank, and then leave him alone forever. He reached into his coat. He took out an envelope. Thick. Heavy. He set it on the table between us. $30,000. The original loan, plus what it would have earned in honest interest for all these years. I stared at it. I don't want your money. It is not my money, Elias. It is your father's. Returned. Honestly calculated for the first time in 50 years. Why are you doing this? Because she asked me to. You owed her nothing. I owed her everything. He stood up, slowly, painfully. He picked up his cane. He looked at me for a long moment. You look so much like her. That is the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me. He almost smiled, a tired smile. He walked down the porch steps. He walked to the car. The driver opened the door. Halloran paused. He looked back. Elias. Yes. Use the money for something good, so that I have done. At least one good thing. Before I die. I did not answer. I just looked at him. He got in the car. The car drove away. The dust settled. The envelope sat on the table. The wind moved through the pines. Ruth was the one who finally opened the envelope. I could not bring myself to. She counted it. Twice. She put it in an old tin can. She labeled the can in black marker. Cora's money. She set it on top of the refrigerator. What are you going to do with this, son? I don't know yet. You will know. How? Because your mother knew, and she was you, and you are her. She kissed the top of my head. She went home. That night I sat in my mother's bedroom. I opened the notebook. I had read all the early letters, all the middle ones, all the years of waiting. The last few. I had been saving. I had been afraid. I picked up the final letter. 3 weeks before she died. I read it. My darling Eli, I am tired today. Tireder than usual. My heart is doing strange things. I went to the doctor last week. He says I need to slow down. He says I need to take it easy. I will not. Because I have been slow for 12 years. Because every minute I have spent alive without you has been a minute of waiting. And I am running out of waiting. If you are reading this, if you have found this notebook, then perhaps the doctor was right. I want to tell you something, Eli. A confession. All the years I told myself I was hiding to protect you. There was another reason, a smaller one, a meaner one. I was hiding because I was ashamed. Ashamed I had failed your father. Ashamed I had let things get so bad. Ashamed that the only way I knew to save my child was to make him hate me. Forgiveness, Eli, is a strange thing. I forgave Halloran years ago, not because he deserved it. He did not. He still does not. I forgave him because the hate was eating me alive, and I had to choose between hate and you won, every time. So I let it go. I am asking you to do the same. Not for him, for yourself. If you find yourself in this house one day, being eaten by anger, by grief, by the long, slow ache of all the years we did not have, I want you to know, you can put it down. You are allowed to put it down. It is not yours to carry forever. I am giving you permission. I am giving you the only thing a mother can give, the only thing that matters. Permission to live. Live, my boy. Live with your whole heart. Plant tomatoes in the front yard. Even though the deer will eat them, let them eat them. Plant more. Hang pictures on the wall. Real ones. Of people you love. Make people you love. Open the door when someone knocks. Open the door, Eli. Always open the door. That is the only thing I learned in 12 years. That you have to open the door when someone knocks. even when you are afraid, especially then, because on the other side of the door is everything. I love you, my son. I love you. I love you. I love you. Mom. I held the letter against my chest. I lay down on the rag rug she had woven. I closed my eyes. I let 12 years of held breath out. It came out slow. It came out shaking. It came out as something that sounded like a laugh and a cry at the same time. I lay there for a long time. When I sat up, the moon was at the window, and I knew what I was going to do. I told Ruth the next morning. She listened with her hands folded around her coffee cup. When I was done, she set the cup down. She looked at me. She nodded once. Yes, she said. Yes, that is exactly what we are going to do, I told Walter. He was sanding a board on his workbench in the back of the store. He did not stop. He just nodded. About time this town had something good in it, he said. He kept sanding, but I saw him wipe his eye with the back of his hand. I called Adelaide. She picked up on the second ring. I told her. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I will draft the paperwork tomorrow. I will do it for free. For her. For as long as I live, I will do it for free. We called it Cora's house. It took 6 months. 6 months of fixing, painting, rewiring, replacing windows, building a second bathroom upstairs, adding a small bedroom off the kitchen. 6 months of Walter and Ruth and Tom and Eleanor and a dozen other people from town showing up on Saturday mornings with hammers and casseroles and old paint they had been meaning to use. 6 months of me sleeping in my mother's bed for the first time, then the second time, then the third, until it was just where I slept. 6 months of reading her letters, all of them, 600 letters. I read the last one on my birthday, the morning I turned 19. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. I read it. I folded it. I put it back in the box. I closed the lid. I said, I'm ready. The first guest arrived on a Saturday in April. A young woman, 23 years old, a 4-year-old girl on her hip. She had driven 6 hours, cracked windshield, 2 trash bags of clothes in the back seat. She got out of the car. She held her daughter close. She looked at me. She looked at the cottage, pale yellow, white trim, porch level, chimney straight, front steps strong. She looked at the sign Walter had carved and hung above the door. Cora's house. Welcome home. I came down off the porch. I held out my hand. My name is Elias. My name is Sarah. This is my daughter, Lily. Welcome. She was crying. She couldn't help it. She was trying not to scare her daughter. But the tears were coming anyway. The way they come when you have been afraid for a long time and your body finally remembers it is allowed to fall apart. I held out the key, the brass key, on the red yarn, the one Adelaide had pressed into my palm a year ago. This is yours, I said, for as long as you need it. The room at the top of the stairs is set up for the two of you. Ruth made dinner. There's stew on the stove. There's a quilt on the bed. There's a coloring book on the nightstand for Lily. Stay 1 night. Stay 1 year. The door is always open. She took the key. She closed her fist around it. She looked down at her daughter. She looked back at me. Why are you doing this? I thought about my mother. I thought about the candle in the bathroom, the screaming into the towel, the 12 years of letters, the size 11 boots in the bottom drawer. I thought about her last letter. Open the door, Eli. Always open the door. Because someone did it for me, I said. Just not soon enough. 6 months later. 3 families staying in Cora's house. A year later. 6. Some stayed a week. Some 3 months. Some long enough to find a job, save up, get on their feet, and leave with hugs and casseroles, and the kind of goodbye that isn't really goodbye. Walter built bunks for the kids. Ruth taught all the mothers her chicken soup. Adelaide handled custody paperwork, restraining orders, divorces, free, every time. I learned how to keep books, how to apply for grants, how to file taxes for a nonprofit. I learned what my mother had been trying to tell me the whole time, that a home is not a house. A home is a verb. A home is something you do for other people, over and over, until the doing becomes the having. Halloran died that summer. I read it in the paper, a small obituary, a few lines, local businessman, survived by no one. I stood in the kitchen with the paper in my hand for a long time. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel anger. I felt the strangest thing, a small, quiet sadness, that a man could live 80 years and leave behind so little, while my mother had lived 42 and left behind a house full of light. A Sunday in October, a year and a half after I stepped off the bus. The leaves are coming down in red drifts. The wind has teeth. The mornings frost the grass. I am sitting on the front porch of Cora's house. Ruth is in her chair beside me, a blanket on her lap, a thermos at her feet. Walter is in the yard, showing a little boy how to whittle a stick. The boy is the son of one of the women staying with us. He is 8 years old. He has not smiled in 3 weeks. Today, he is smiling. Eleanor is in the kitchen baking apple pies. The smell is coming through the open door. Adelaide is on the phone with a judge 2 states away, walking somebody's grandmother through an emergency custody hearing. A young woman is sitting on the porch step below me. Her name is Hannah. She came 2 months ago. She is 19. She has a baby. She has not slept through the night in 18 months. She is sleeping now. She is leaning against the porch column. The baby is in her arms. She is sleeping for the first time, she told me yesterday, in a long, long time. I am holding a letter, a new one, a letter I have been writing to my mother for the past year. I write her one every Sunday. I tell her what I planted. I tell her who came. I tell her which kids learned to ride bikes in our front yard. I tell her about the night Walter played the harmonica until everyone in the house cried, including Walter. I tell her I love her. Every letter. I keep them in the box under the floorboard, just like she did. Ruth reaches over. She touches my hand. You did it, son. We did it. No, you did it. We just helped. I look at her. I look at Walter in the yard. I look at the sleeping girl and the sleeping baby. I look at the cottage, pale yellow, white trim, smoke rising from the chimney in a thin straight line. I look at the road, the same dirt road I walked up a year and a half ago, with a sandwich in my backpack and a key on a piece of red yarn. I close my eyes. I let the cold air fill my chest. I think about a 6-year-old boy in a sterile office, told to wait for a mother who never came. I want to reach back through time. I want to put my hand on his small shoulder. I want to whisper in his ear, "Hold on, kid." She came back. She came back in the only way she could, and one day, so will you. My name is Elias Brennan. I am Cora's son. I am 19 years old now. I grew up believing I was unwanted. I grew up believing I had been left. I grew up in a cardboard box, 3 changes of clothes, a paperback I had stopped reading, and then a woman with silver hair pressed a warm brass key into my hand, and I got on a bus, and I walked 2 miles down a dirt road, and I climbed through a window, and I found my mother. I found her in 100 boards I pried off windows. I found her in a pair of size 11 boots that fit. I found her in a stone in a hearth. I found her in a tape recording. I found her in a vegetable garden. I found her in a town full of people who had loved her so much. They were ready to love me too. I found her in a letter that gave me permission to live. I found her in a door I am, every day, learning to keep open. They told me my mother left me nothing. They were wrong. She left me everything. She left me a home. She left me a community. She left me a way to live. She left me the knowledge that under every story of abandonment, there is sometimes a story of love so fierce, it wore the mask of its opposite, to keep a child alive. If you have ever felt unwanted, if you have ever wondered whether you were left because you were unlovable, if you have ever looked at the empty spaces in your story and decided they were proof of your own worthlessness, I want you to know, there may be a letter somewhere, There may be a box under a floorboard. There may be a woman in a yellow shutter house, waiting 8 months. On a wooden chair beside a dirt road. There may be a mother you never knew, who never stopped writing your name. Hold on, hold on, hold on. The door is open. Come home.